best practices for directly sourcing former employees, retirees, and other high-talent contractors. My name is Dawn McCartney. I am a director with Staffing Industry Analysts, and I will be moderating our session today. This is a thought leadership series webinar, and just to educate the audience, this is where we have the suppliers of staffing services share their expertise. And I can tell you our panelists today will absolutely be doing that. But as a little disclaimer, the views that will be expressed in this webinar are those of the sponsor and not necessarily that of Staffing Industry Analysts. A little bit about Staffing Industry Analysts for those that may not be familiar with us. We are the leading global advisor on contingent work. Our data and research is provided to over 1,000 client organizations. When we state client organizations, those are staffing companies and providers to the contingent workforce arena. We are also proud to say we have over 70 buyers that are part of our CWS Council. We were acquired by Crane Communication in 2008. We do have headquarters in Mountain View, California, and London, England. Speaking of that council membership, just a few of the logos that I am very proud to say are my clients, and I am thrilled that I have the partnership that I do with them. But again, as you can see, a pretty impressive group of members, and we're very fortunate for their insight to not only the contingent world, but also their programs. So thank you to all of them. A couple of dates for everyone to keep track of. I'm sure you have started to see the emails, but we do have two of our most iconic events every year. This year it will be October 6th and 7th. We have our CWS Solutions Forum. And then we also have, following that, the CWS Summit. Both of these will be taking place in Las Vegas at the Mirage. If you can, I would say to attend these events, as they are awesome events for anyone who finds themselves working in this industry that we call contingent labor. One of the other products that I'm very proud to say we offer is our CCWP, the certification. We do have a class coming up August 19th and 20th in Atlanta, Georgia. And then if you notice, there's also a class that's going to be held October 6th and 7th in Las Vegas. That actually is the same dates as the Solutions Forum. So if anyone is interested in taking the certification, one thing that we are offering is for those that attend the CCWP class, October 6th and 7th, we would then extend free admission to the CWS Summit, which then follows October 8th and 9th. So lots of great information and events coming up. But I would like to say thank you to our sponsor and our thought leader, MBO Partners, and Jean. You guys have done a phenomenal amount of work in this area, and we're very grateful that you're willing to share it with us today. And so with today's topic, I will tell you this area, especially the retirees and alumni, has been getting a lot of attention. And I see it's whether an organization is looking to bring on a contingent worker that they found themselves, so more of that direct sourcing. I know I've even had someone reach out to us that said, I've laid off a person as an employee, but now I want to bring them back as a contingent worker. So lots of different scenarios that are now appearing on the buyer's side. And just understanding what risks are involved and what best practices they should be considering is critical. And so to help us with these areas are two phenomenal speakers. We're very fortunate to have Charlie Stevens. He is an attorney with Michael Best and Friedrich. And Charlie's areas of expertise are risk management and employee benefits. So for anyone who has faced this particular challenge, you know that those are critical areas to understand. We also have Gene Zano, and he is president and CEO of MBO Partners. And I will say Gene and his organization are probably some of the most innovative individuals that I have seen in this particular area of contingent worker engagements. So I will say thank you to both of you for taking the time, and as I said, to share your insight. And I think one thing is important. Things are changing, so the times they are changing. The independent worker talent has become a significant segment, and with all of the research and data that we have, we see that this area is just going to continue to grow. I think when we start to talk about those retirees, think that's an amazing number, but if you look at that, 10,000 baby boomers reach retirement age every day. That is a large amount of knowledge that is leaving our workforce or has the ability to. And then I think we can't ignore LinkedIn and the social networks and that have created a new open talent paradigm that we are now finding ourselves having access to. And so with that, this new paradigm, it's not only being driven by those social networks, but I think it's also changing contingent workforce programs. So we're finding that there's more of a demand of specialized high talent resources. I think the pressure of cost savings, we always have that, and we're now finding that direct sourcing can provide that. I think what I have also heard from many of our council members is they have brands that bring the people themselves, so why do I need to engage with a supplier? So I think as these programs mature and they start to include this direct sourcing and the alumni and retirees, we need to help them implement best practices, which include efficiency and compliance. So those direct sourcing programs are on the rise. I think everyone has at least thought about it or has at least looked into it a little. So Jean, I'm going to ask you, you guys have done a ton of research and work related to the independent workforce. Could you just make sure, I keep throwing out the words direct sourcing, could you explain what we mean by that? And then maybe why you think companies are sourcing their own talent instead of, the traditional way of utilizing a staffing partner?
Sure. And thank you, Dawn, for all the kind words. And it's a pleasure to be here today and to speak about these growing trends toward using direct sourcing. So I'll just set the stage a little bit. So, in the past, companies have used direct sourcing for their full-time employees, generally under the control of their HR talent acquisition teams. But directly sourcing contract talent by HR has been pretty rare. And if they happen to come across someone that needed to be engaged on a temporary or contingent basis, they would generally payroll them through one of their staffing providers. However, most recently, HR is not the only source for talent. Full-time is also not the only category of worker. So if any of you follow Andrew Carpy's work, you will find that he's been banging the drum on an explosion in new talent acquisition options and multiple types of work arrangements. And there's many other experts that are really have put a lot of effort into uncovering this new form of talent acquisition. And today there's kind of more and more managers that are identifying their own talent and engaging them as contractors. And we're moving more and more into what I would like to call a peer-to-peer or manager-to-contract worker environment, which is kind of a way to think about it is we're really experiencing the consumerization of talent. And it's similar to what happened to IT departments in the 1990s. You might remember, some of you and some of us, you might remember that when IT was far more centralized, and the CIO was able to dictate and control the entire chain of computing in a large enterprise. However, as IT became more personalized and consumerized, the consumer-based technologies actually became more powerful, they became more valuable to the users, and they became far more influential to the entire enterprise. So today, progressive organizations support an open IT philosophy where it's a bring your own device environment, right, that empowers users to kind of work from anywhere. It allows the organization to have an open environment where they can connect to any device. It delivers more productivity to the enterprise and more convenience to the users. So you take that analogy, and I believe we are now moving into a new workforce era whereby business unit managers will demand a bring-your-own-talent environment, where talent is now open, skills are visible, work is largely digital, and managers are beginning to start to organize and build pools of talent that they can tap from time to time without a lot of friction. And they're finding they could do it at lower costs, lower kind of bureaucracy or paperwork and rules and regulations than ever before. So we're seeing our organizations, all of our organizations, being pressured to support this new direct sourcing requirement. But they need to also establish a safe and easy protocol to engage contract talent with an enterprise program that can assure the enterprise of governance and proper compliance to laws and regulations and corporate policies. And these programs are being called direct sourcing programs. But I'm sure we will soon come up with some new acronym or something to name this more eloquently. But for now, we're calling it direct sourcing programs. So just to summarize, the old talent acquisition model is changing with this new digital economy that we're all emerged with inside of. And tools like LinkedIn, Facebook, social communities for networking, it's actually more effective now for companies to adopt, in certain situations, direct sourcing as opposed to using other channels, especially for the higher talent, consulting talent who are out there, and for alumni who are in the process of wanting to kind of, what I like to say, the slow goodbye, kind of not really quit their career, but kind of change their career and do something different. So the challenge, which we're going to talk about today, is implementing what I would like to call a purpose-built environment or purpose-built system designed to manage the process, to properly educate all the stakeholders, to build talent pools, to manage the various work arrangements, and to manage the payments and processes that are important to mitigate risk, while still enabling this new open peer-to-peer consumerization of talent.
Awesome. Well, thank you. So what I would like to do, and it's just for us to get a better gauge of those that are participating on this webinar. So we have quite a few attendees. So for a quick poll, and for those of you listening, it will be located on your right-hand side. If you could, what are the two most significant drivers of growth in this direct sourcing that you feel? So is it the cost savings, through removing that middleman? Do you guys see it as brain drain? So lots of people that are retiring and they're the only ones who know it. Is it maybe managers' dissatisfaction with your traditional process, or do you just feel that these online tools have just made it too easy? So again, if you could just take a second to answer that, that would be great, and then I will share the responses later on. But I think something that's important is, Charlie, so from a business perspective, it makes sense to source this talent, but Jean mentioned, risk mitigation. So as we all know, there's some legal or regulatory considerations that companies shy away from this approach, and I can tell you when I was in the buyer's seat, I was guilty of it. What are some of the concerns that we should consider?
Well, Dawn, first, as a lawyer, my goal is to permit parties to freely determine their relationship and the terms and conditions of that relationship. And sometimes that's in the face of ambiguous and conflicting laws. And that's my main driver and my main concern in assisting our clients in sorting through these things. And in terms of what I do, quite a bit of it is risk management. I'll tell you, employment law is more complicated today than it's ever been, and many different laws apply in determining whether someone is an employee and whether that employer has obligations with regard to that employee and what those might be. Companies may understand that they're at risk for misclassifying workers as employees or independent contractors or possibly employees, of someone else. But they may not understand the true risks because quite often with these conflicting laws, a worker could be an independent contractor for employment tax purposes, but an employee for workers' comp purposes or other laws. And an employee could be a co-employee for family and medical leave or employment discrimination purposes, even though that person may not be on someone's payroll. Each state and federal agency may have their own set of rules. So we have to be concerned about looking at sources of law. And furthermore, these rules can be circular and overlapping. So we've understood for many years that one agency may take certain things into account in determining an employee's status, and so it gets to be a little circular. So, for example, you could have someone who's viewed as an employee for Affordable Care Act purposes because, as one factor, they are treated as an employee for tax purposes. But if the company acknowledges a responsibility for ACA purposes, that could be taken into account by other agencies. So it is circular that way. Moreover, even if we're not that concerned, we should be, but even if we set aside how agencies look at the relationship, there is a risk of direct claims by workers and their lawyers for wages, employment benefits, and other claims. And one concern for those of us representing large companies is that a growth area for plaintiffs' lawyers is in employment class actions on behalf of allegedly misclassified employees. So it is important to pay attention to the details and have a consistent approach. Those companies who attempt to do this, but without a lot of firsthand knowledge and constant monitoring of the changing laws, need to have a real good understanding of what they don't know. So not knowing what you don't know involves a lot of risk. And to the extent necessary, get the advice or assistance of someone that can help you manage those risks. It's not only folks in procurement or HR that need to understand the risks. Managers need to understand the rules as well. And so sometimes there is some training in terms of, all right, here's what our approaches are, and here's how we need to make sure everyone in the organization understands them.
Yeah, and I would say I think all of us that are in this industry have seen those class action lawsuits become more and more popular. So I will say, Jean, we did get a question that I know we don't necessarily touch on later on, so I'd like to bring it up now.
Sure.
So someone is sitting in the audience and saying, all right, doesn't direct sourcing actually cost us significantly more money because I'm not giving suppliers that competitive bid or giving them that rate range? How do you respond to that question?
So it depends. Certainly that is an area to be concerned with. And it really comes down to, one, are you doing things on a statement of work basis where it's project-based, in which case there is no rate card. The other thing is, if you're talking about high-talent people, and your managers are probably in a better position than, the procurement team to know whether someone's value is appropriate for their assignment. And managers are just wanting to, be able to have that control. Now, sure, could they overpay for someone? Absolutely. But when you look at it overall, and certainly the experience we're seeing, and really when you look at the productivity of companies and why this is really catching on in a trend, is because it is becoming more effective. Work is finding talent as opposed to talent finding work these days. And when I am a manager and I have a P&L and I have a budget or a project, I have to manage my mission within my cost structure. So it is giving more empowerment to your managers, for certain. Yeah. But again, if it's a commodity labor, I think the rate cards absolutely is the way to go. If it's high talent labor, more intellectual property, more strategic, I actually think this is a better, more efficient way to procure the service.
Yeah, and I think a lot of it just goes with that education and communication internally. So we do have the poll results back. It looks like if our top two, so that cost savings through removing that middleman, and then also that concern about the brain drain. And I know that that is actually critical in some particular environments of our council members. So with that, what I'd also say, so as I listen to what both of you shared, we hear the pros and the cons to the direct sourcing. So I'm just wondering, could we share maybe some best practices with the audience about that real world of non-employee engagements? And if I could, I'm going to ask Jean, if you would start, could you share, if you could give one recommendation to a client that's considering sourcing their own talent, what would you say to them?
One thing, okay, that'll be hard. But I'm going to say structuring the engagement as a proper business-to-business work arrangement is the key and is critical. So, if possible, define the work as a project. Execute some kind of written statement of work. The document is critical for setting the stage and especially for returning alumni for setting that stage. And it should include, at a minimum, specific deliverables, deliverable date, the agreed upon payments based on milestones, and kind of a right for you as the organization, as the buyer, to accept the work before the payment. And an analogy, Dawn, that I like to use that I think really drives this point home, literally drives it into your home, is to think about this as an analogy. Think about you wanting to engage a contractor to renovate your kitchen. You certainly wouldn't pay them by the hour. You wouldn't, tell them exactly how to deliver their work and how to do, because otherwise you're probably doing it yourself, or you're certainly hiring someone that you think is good at doing it. You would not tell them, exactly, what tools to use. They'd use their own tools. And you'd put a deadline as to when you want it done, when you want it completed. And you're probably not going to pay them until you're happy, or you might pay them in milestones. And these are the types of things to think about. And when you really think about it, that's truly an arm's length business-to-business interaction. And, you cannot just simply disguise, and I'm sure Charlie could comment on this, but you cannot just simply disguise an employee arrangement by labeling it differently or trying to come up with some automated algorithm up front that tries to classify them as an appropriate independent contractor. Just writing it down or just trying to check some boxes up front is just not enough. What really matters is the facts and the circumstances applied retroactively to how it happened. That's what will really determine your ultimate defense, and ultimately what was this person really doing, and was it truly a business-to-business relationship. So, you have to look at all the stakeholders as well that are motivated, to challenge any kind of suspicious work arrangements. Charlie just mentioned a few. And, I could just tell you from our work in this area, there are so many watchdogs out there, and I'll call it vultures out there, that are, also designing whistleblower programs, designed to uncover misclassified workers. And, you have the IRS and the state unemployment, which, quite honestly, it's about the money. They want to ensure they get their taxes. You have the Department of Labor, and we happen to be in a very, very friendly labor-friendly administration today in the White House. And you're going to see lots of laws being extremely enforced very aggressively that are about worker protections and making sure that you're not misclassifying an employee in another way so that you don't have to take care of them properly or give them benefits. And of course, like Charlie said, the legal profession, is finding class action litigation is a very lucrative area. And, everybody has a cousin or a friend or someone that is a lawyer and can say, gee, maybe I can get you something for that. So most importantly is try to create a true business-to-business relationship with these contractors that you're directly sourcing.
So one thing I want to share that I thought was interesting, based on our previous question about the cost, we had someone who responded that says they've aligned their direct sourcing contractor rates to align with their full-time rates, or if they do payrolling plus the add-on, the MSP and the VMS fees. So I thought that was an interesting approach to take. But, okay, Charlie, so legal stuff, you're up. So you brought up some of the risks associated with this approach. And it has to do with that lovely word that we all start to cringe, that co-employment, and then that benefits piece. So how do you recommend a company protect themselves on that legal front of this?
Well, the most important thing for the lawyer is to have a case to win in case something blows up. And so our goal is to structure relationships with documents and to have something to point to that correctly reflects the relationship and spells out and clearly communicates the nature of the relationship, so there can't be any misconception there, but also correctly captures what, in fact, you were actually doing. So the best structure and the best documents won't carry the day if that doesn't reflect reality. So have good documents, but also be careful to make sure that the arrangements that you have actually match the documents. Gene is right. Labels don't matter, and much of the time, other approaches that you adopt, including term limits and other things, will not be dispositive. They may be helpful, but they won't seal the deal for the lawyer that has to defend you later. I understand that for a lot of people, the biggest issue is the brain drain and referring to people who have been employed and then retire and then come back. That's the biggest legal issues I encounter there are related to benefits claims. So you're in trouble if you are practicing that type of work and then return as something other than an employee, where your pension plans, 401k, severance plans, even the Affordable Care Act doesn't take into account the fact that you may have returning workers who were former employees. If your benefit plan specifically excludes contractors, then the issue could be, well, that's fine, but let's communicate really well that these folks are contractors. And HR really does that best, and that's a good thing, but we should make sure HR is doing that. These issues should be covered orally and in written communications during onboarding and during exit interviews and whenever you have an opportunity to have those communications. Furthermore, no matter what you tell the individuals, the benefit plans have to accurately reflect who's eligible and who's not and manage those risks. A great benefit plan clause to have, but many plans don't have it, is the one that says even if the individual is later reclassified, their benefit eligibility is not retroactively changed. And so if they are deemed ineligible, they are ineligible until they are deemed eligible. And it's remarkable how many benefit plans don't actually read that way. If individuals are truly not employees, then there should not be any co-employment risks, but you have to make sure that you're good at classifying and you have truly and accurately captured that contract workers are truly not employees. So see if you're good at making those decisions and establishing a good decision-making rubric and, in fact, following it. You may have folks in-house who say, well, I don't really, I know what our internal rules are, but I can't follow them in this case because I really need this talent. Try to structure it so that folks in-house can't do the end around. Otherwise, you're going to lose some of these cases. Or at least if we know they're going to do the end around, try to take that into account in structuring legally the benefit plans and other policies that you have. With regard to the Affordable Care Act, that is causing a lot of concern. And now we have very different rules that if a person is a common law employee, and that's built into the law, then that person ought to be offered benefits if they average 30 or more hours a week. And our goal is to make sure that someone is responsible for full-time employees if they truly are employees. So the Affordable Care Act has made it more and more important to make sure, one, you're complying with that law, your eligibility rules are accurately catching the people you need to catch. But two, there's a huge amount of risk management there, because if you go over the limit in terms of the number of people you don't have on your plan, the cushion that you occasionally see under the Affordable Care Act, you could be facing a massive pay or play penalty. So the employer has to make sure, for all kinds of reasons, but over the last few months, as 2015 is approaching, more and more of our clients have been asking us, all right, are we doing the right thing with the Affordable Care Act? And are we at risk for pay or play? And if you don't take into account the fact that you could wind up with some employees that were previously misclassified, you're not correctly managing your ACA risks.
Right. So I'm going to say we'll probably get the most hits on hearing this audio over again just based on people wanting to get that clause that you shared that should be in their benefits plan. So. All right, so Charlie, you brought up a lot of interesting things and a lot of areas that we need to be aware of. And I hate to say the word concerned, but I think concerned is accurate too. So one area that we get questions about quite a bit is how should you pay these resources? And then how should you engage with them? So how do you safely put together a good engagement?
Well, I think the first thing that we ask our clients is, what do you want to do? Do you want to have, and decide what it is. Don't have something that's kind of ambiguous. Make a decision as to if you're not comfortable with a direct hire and paying wages reported under a W-2, then let's decide what this individual is. Is he someone else's employee through a staffing company or through MBO partners or through someone, or is it instead a person who's a truly independent contractor? Make that decision. If it turns out that this person is going to be treated as someone else's employee or as an independent contractor, don't make arrangements with them that they get overtime if they work more hours than anticipated, or that they somehow get vacation or sick pay if something happens to them and they get sick, or provide other employment type benefits. These people are workers and need to be treated as if it's a separate business and they're in that business and that they bear risks if they get sick or other things happen. It also is difficult where the contract worker is looking for employment benefits and other perks that aren't available, but you have to let them know and negotiate the appropriate terms. And if you're not offering them benefits and they say, well, then I'll need more money, well, then that's fine. Take into account that benefits won't be paid and be very open about this approach. And my suggestion is, in the engagement, whenever you have an opportunity to lay out the terms and be concrete about it and get it in writing, then take that opportunity.
Thank you. So, Jean, I'm going to call you back up because I have a question. We keep talking about it's got to be a well-structured assignment, and we have to have the right documentation. What else do we also need to take into consideration, or what are some of the other aspects of this actual project structure that we should consider as we are thinking about bringing or re-engaging with these types of resources?
Well, again, I love to use the analogy of, you engaging someone to renovate your kitchen. So there's got to be some risk involved for the worker, right? These people are in business. If you're an independent contractor, you're an independent business. And the relationship has to reflect that. So in that project work, you need to make sure they have there has to be some expenses they're covering before you pay them, not just their salary. There needs to be a level of risk that they're taking on. It's called entrepreneurial risk is what I think it's referred to. So structure the project where they need to be bearing their own at least their own costs for things like insurance, and if there are supplies or travel, don't pay their travel. Let them pay their travel. This is where, you made a comment earlier, somebody's just taking payroll and uplifting it with, the VMS fee and payroll tax. I'm not sure that's a good idea, quite honestly. Maybe in certain situations it is. There's a lot more to running a business than just my salary plus benefits. If I'm running a business, and we all are in business today. We're part of our large enterprises. Everybody on this call. There's a lot of departments. You got marketing. You got sales. You got your administration and accounting. Yes, for one person, you don't need departments, but they do have expenses. They're not going to be billing their time all the time. They have to be going out and doing business development. They have marketing expenses. They should have a website. They should have business cards. They should have business insurances. So there needs to be a level of risk. There needs to be definition of what the project is about. And yeah, they need to also know that if you don't like the work, they're not going to get paid. And this is really pretty hard to do, certainly with former employees, because there's also that relationship that kind of wasn't, kind of left over. If you worked with me for 20 years and now, all of a sudden I got to think of you as a vendor, it's hard to do. It takes a lot of education, like Charlie just said.
Yeah, so if we could, I'm going to ask, we're going to talk about bringing back that previous employee, and even in the topic of bringing back a retiree, this is a hot topic, especially with several of our council members that find themselves in industries that maybe are hurting to get young individuals to even want to consider a future career. So when we think about bringing in retirees, Charlie, what are some of the issues that we need to be aware of or that we need to consider with this type of engagement from the legal side of things? So bringing back a retiree, what are some of the legal perspectives or things that I have to take into consideration?
What I like to do in trying to assess legal risks is to look at the sources of those risks and try to encapsulate them and manage them one by one. And a major problem for returning retirees is the manner in which the IRS views this practice on the part of the employer. It is a violation of federal employee benefits law under ERISA to provide a retirement plan distribution to a person who is an active employee. And there are major problems that the IRS will see if that happens. And so some employees who wish to access their retirement money will terminate employment, apply for a distribution from their 401k plan, and then seek to be reemployed. And the IRS could view that temporary interruption of employment to simply be a sham and permitting the employer to provide in-service distributions. And imagine how difficult that is if the person applies for the distribution while they are a non-employee, but then receives the distribution after they've returned to the company and are perhaps classified as an employee or retroactively reclassified as an employee. So it's important that you understand there's a risk there from the IRS with respect to the retirement plan that many people may not be aware of. There's a red flag there if the person receives a W-2 form and a 1099 form in the same year, where the IRS can say, well, something fishy going on here. So this does raise a red flag with the IRS. Now, some employers will try to manage that risk by requiring some period of months to pass between the initial period of employment and the individual's return to service. But this alone may not entirely manage the risk. It may help, depending on how much time goes by. But the employer should really ask, how is the returning individual's work different than when he was here as an employee? And if it's not that much different, the employer should be hesitant to reclassify the worker as an independent contractor. If they're doing exactly the same thing, that would be difficult to do. So then you have to consider other options, and that is have that person come back as someone else's employee, or Plan C or Plan D, whatever we can come up with. That preservation of talent is critical, but you have to manage the risk as you address how we get that talent back.
Yeah, and I'm going to say that's one of the biggest challenges that I think for those that are running programs. You get, executives coming to you saying, hey, I'm going to retire. I was told to come talk to you about maybe coming back and doing some additional work before they've even walked out of the building. And it's trying to educate internally. How do we tell our, executive leadership and our management that there is a risk? We can't just keep bringing these people back. Realize they have all that knowledge and that brain drain, but at the same time, we don't want to put ourselves at any type of risk. So I will also say that length of time, I'm so glad you touched on that, because we did have that from one of the audience members asking, is there a time frame or a break in service that mitigates that risk?
Well, Dawn, I'll tell you what's important to me, and that is not to have a wink and a nod that's reflected somewhere before a person's employment ends. And I would much rather see an email that says this is a termination of employment and have a nice life, where you can point to that later if you need it.
Yeah, I agree. So I would like to do another polling question for the audience. So now that you have listened to this and you've obviously had a reason to join the webinar, do you see direct sourcing, which is also re-engaging maybe alumni or retirees, as one of the top 10 initiatives for you in 2015? And if you wouldn't mind just saying yes, no, it's important now, or maybe after 2015, that would be helpful. And again, just trying to see what different buyers are dealing with and where their challenges lie. So what I'd like to do now is I have a question for both of you. Our program managers always tell us one of their biggest challenges, and kind of what I alluded to a little bit ago, educating that internal manager on not only their internal processes and procedures and what you need to do, but also, how to engage contingent workers and what their relationship should look like. So I think now as I listen to all this, we're going to add another complexity when it comes to re-engaging a previous employee or retiree. So if either of you can speak to maybe some of the creative ways you've seen your clients do this, that would be great.
So I'll just jump in, give Charlie a break to get a glass of water. But I'm going to say the number one thing that I think is missing in enterprises today that we need to tap into is, HR. HR, at least in our experience, has been kind of slow to get to the table to help solve this problem of contract labor. And, one of the things HR does really, really well is communicate. And I think, this is so much about communicating to all the stakeholders as to how to do things the right way, and to do that not transactionally at the time they need to get it done, because it's too frustrating at that point. You tend to compromise your strategic principles and risk mitigation values that you put in place because you need to get something done right away. But there needs to be a strategy in place. There needs to be education in place. And I think HR can be a really critical component to helping the organization, training its managers, setting up policies, and working with procurement, working with the departing alumni. And we're not just talking about retirees, by the way. There's a lot of alumni. I mean, one of the, in our research, independent workers tend to have a heavier weighting towards women. And in the general workforce, women are not 50%. They're in the high 40%. In the independent workforce, they're above 50%. And there's a lot of women that are highly talented that, due to needs of wanting to have a different work-life balance, tend to leave their traditional employment, maybe do project work or independent work for a while and then come back or whatever. So we're not just talking about retirees. We're talking about having a new way of working and managing this 21st century workforce, which HR, I believe, needs to really help the organization. So I'll just leave it at that for now, and I could talk more about that. I know we have a couple of slides later.
Yeah, and I was going to say, we're looking at the time, and I will tell you we got a couple of really good questions. So for those of you that have put through the questions, I will get to them. But I do want to touch, so Charlie, let's go to the flip side of that. So we've heard things that we should be doing. What about something that illustrates what we should not be doing?
Well, there's some great cases out there, reported court decisions, where just by reading the decision, you will learn here's what they shouldn't have done. And so those are, I think, very instructive. Most of the time, looking back in hindsight, what you should have done better is communicate. And Jean is absolutely correct. HR is good at that. They need to be tapped more at that. But having, again, taking every opportunity to set the correct stage in terms of what the terms and conditions are is really the strong approach. There are some things that you just don't have any control over. And in most of those situations, those involve individuals who negotiated particular arrangements as contractors and then later decided they didn't want to be treated as contractors but would rather be treated as employees. and they're coming back and saying, well, we really are employees, and we should have gotten these retroactive benefits and wage increases, and then they try to evoke whistleblower status, and it's very difficult to manage that risk. The best way, I think, to manage it, at least as far as you can, is to have documents that belie that argument, that they were really employees all along. And at least reputable attorneys would recognize that those individuals really don't have much of a case and tell them not to try. So through proper drafting and adoption and proper engagement processes, proper drafting of employee benefit plans, that's how you get there. And what not to do is not to do those things.
Yeah, and I know, do as I say, not as I do. But we have a couple questions that have come up that I get concerned. They're good questions, so I want to get to them. I know we have a lot of information still to share, but Charlie, two things that came up. What if the retiree forms his or her own company? Does that mitigate any type of risk? And then also, if not, if we bring them back as a W-2 employee of a staffing agency, does that mitigate any type of risk? Or do they both leave us, and I say us, the buyer or the organization, vulnerable for some sort of legal repercussion?
Well, the operative term that I focused on as you were asking the question was the word mitigate. And the answer is yes. It mitigates risk to the extent that you have other factors that you can point to that say this is not our W-2 common law employee. But I have to caution everyone, that's not the dispositive answer. It's not as if you can rely on that as saying, well, we will never have a problem. The agencies that look at this in terms of applying employment law issues and the possible claims that you have from people who later try to reclassify the relationship say that you really do need to pay attention to something other than that. The fact that there's an entity that you're contracting with is certainly helpful. But you have to ask, well, is there anyone else that this person is providing services to? And what is the nature of the relationship? And we have larger stakes than we've had before in terms of the importance of these relationships. So sometimes they are retroactively attacked.
Yeah. Yeah, it doesn't bode well, I'm sure, if they started their own company and the only customer they have is their previous employer. So
that's right.
All right. So with that, we do have the final poll and the results. So do we see this, the direct sourcing? We got a quarter of the audience saying yes, and then some, about 14%, saying it's critical now for them, and then after 2015, another quarter. So pretty good mix with our audience here. So I will say I've had the luxury of being able to talk to both of you and getting a lot of this information, but we have given our audience a ton to think about in the last 40-plus minutes, 50 minutes. Jean, would you mind just give us some, I guess, high-level best practices that we should be considering as we start to move forward with this type of engagement?
Absolutely. Let's talk about training, and let's talk about training for the soon-to-be alumni, right? So whether, obviously for retirees, if you know in advance, but again, if HR gets involved and HR gets the alert, hey, someone, someone's going to be retiring, or at least the organization knows, hey, if I'm about to leave the company, there's someone at HR I could talk to learn about how I might be able to re-engage back and turn my employer into a client, right? So that's really what you're doing. And most people that start businesses, quite honestly, they go back to their former relationships, and there's nothing wrong with that as long as it's done in a true arm's length relationship. So I would say that the soon-to-be alumni or some program within HR, should become a standard part of HR practice. And, you want to avoid surprises, right? The biggest thing you want to do is to avoid having people suddenly think, well, gee, I'm leaving on Monday. I'm leaving on Friday, coming back on Monday, and by the way, I'm going to be treated the same way, getting the same things, and know I'm getting paid by the hour. That's not the case, and I think there's education that needs to happen, and many former employees don't recognize really what's involved to operate an independent business. And like Charlie said, if they don't want to operate an independent business, then they should be payrolled through, or mitigated, or someone said putting them through a payrolling system, and that could be done as well. And some people are more appropriate to operate that way. There are other risks you need to take care of and mitigate when you're payrolling someone. You kind of get the tax people off your back, but you have to make sure benefits and things like Charlie said, that you've got the other pieces put in place, and you might want to, make sure that there's, again, training with your managers that you can't overreach the control with those people. Otherwise, you will implicate yourself into also being the employer. And the one other thing I want to say that hasn't been brought up on this call yet, but I think it's one of the biggest risks, is when you have contractors, whether they're former employees or not, and I could give you stories where companies have decided, hey, you know what, all my employees are going to turn them into contractors, and they send them off, and they come up with some kind of pay rate scheme and send them to a payrolling provider, and all of a sudden these employees or these group of employees are upset. The biggest risk are disgruntled workers. Disgruntled workers will cause you pain. There's too many ways for them to cause you pain. So HR needs to be involved, because they need to make sure there's a venting mechanism. Make sure that you're not having workers that are feeling mistreated or are surprised about what they were doing. So that's training is key. The next is self-employability as a mindset. For those people that really say, you know what, I want to go off on my own. I want to have my own self-determination as to what I want to do with my life. I'm either leaving because I've been with the company for 10 years and I want to go off on my own. I want to have better work-life balance, or I'm going to retire and do what I call a slow goodbye. So I'm not going to retire from working. I'm going to retire from this company, and I'm going to start doing project work. And maybe I'll take on a project and take off for 3 weeks, or maybe I'll travel and do something else. So assess their self-employable mindset. Make sure before someone leaves your organization, and again, there can almost be a survey about this and kind of a testing mechanism in terms of, are these people, do they really understand? Have they understood what we've communicated to them, and do they truly have a self-employable mindset where they don't want to be anyone's employee, they want to go off on their own? And that's another indicator you could put in their profile to know that your managers know that this person gets it, where perhaps others don't. You need to engage them differently. You would engage them differently if they are not self-employable versus being self-employable. Then we go, making it easy. So one of the most intimidating things for someone going off on their own, once they're self-employable and they say, I want to do it myself, it's not, finding the work and doing the work and getting paid. Some of the most intimidating things is, how do I do this? So you need to give them, provide a program for them as to options for them, guide them to providers that they can make choices in terms of, how do I want to set myself up? How do I deal with insurance? How do I do this thing the right way? And our experience is a lot of these independent workers want to do things the right way, but they don't really know how. They can't afford the advice. They get misguided advice. And certainly managers, someone even said on this call, just go incorporate. That's not enough. You need to do more. You need to have all the proper infrastructure. So again, these are things that our enterprises can do to help create a better community of workers that you could tap as independent workers. And then finally, to make anything successful, you got to have some good PR and create value for all your stakeholders. And you need to think about all your stakeholders, right? So, to think about the not only the contractors, but your managers, right? So you need to make it easy for your managers to do this, truly becoming, a support mechanism to allow them to do what, the genie's out of the bottle. This direct sourcing, and there's too many online tools right now. It's going to happen. You're not going to be able to lock it up. So you better come to putting together a program that kind of makes it easy for them. And then for the actual contractors and workers, everybody wants to be the employer of choice. I'm going to say add another title to your organization. You want to be the client of choice. And if you really do that and create a program that makes these former employees and other contractors know that it's so easy to do work with this organization, they taught me how to do it right, they actually helped me get to another stage of my career, that's just great publicity for your brand. Again, it mitigates that risk of having disgruntled workers, and I think all those things put together is kind of a winning ticket, the best that can be done to try to mitigate your risk, but enable this new way of work, which is, happening, and you're going to have the pressure of business forcing it, because we're competing around the globe, and we have to deal with reality.
Yeah, and I would say that client of choice is a critical point right now, because we've seen the tides have changed. So we now are, used to be we, the buyers, were in the control, and we could choose whoever we wanted. Now it's flipped. The contingent worker is the one who has more of that, hold on us. So absolutely being the client of choice. So I will say that we did leave some time for Q&A. However, we have hit all of the questions, and we are almost out of time. So I would like to say thank you to MBO and Jean and your entire team. And Charlie, thank you so much. I always love it when an attorney can put things into perspective that I understand. So I thank you for what I would say dumbing it down for me. It was very much appreciated. And I would like to remind everybody, you will get these slides and a link to be able to hear it. So if you would like to get that clause, as I said, I'm sure a lot of people are going to talk to their benefits department. I also would like to remind everybody that we will be having a similar session located in Vegas. So if this is something that you would like to hear more about, or would like someone else from your organization to attend, you will have that opportunity at our event in Vegas. And so with that, I would say thank you to all of the audience participants. And again, thank you to Jean and to Charlie. You guys have been a great group to partner with. And thank you, everyone, for being part of our session today.
Thank you, Don.
Thank you.